All right. Well,
Maria.
welcome back, everyone, to another exciting talk for Jane Austen and Company. This is our final talk in our Reading with Jane Austen series. So once again, hello, my name is Anne Ferdig. I am the co-director for Jane Austen and Company, and I am joined here tonight by my wonderful co-hosts, Inga Brody and Susan Allen Ford, as well as our technical director, Malika Amoruso.
Yes, welcome to our final installment. I will note that our friend Maria in Brazil is even pausing her carnival events on this Mardi Gras day to join us. So thank you, Maria, and thanks everybody else for coming. Today we get to welcome Dr. Julie Park, who will be speaking on folding in and folding out, making and writing the extra illustrated book.
It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Julie Park. Hold on, I just lost my screen here. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty here. I'm in from Stratford-on-Avon. Okay, so Julie Park is a Paterno Family Librarian for Literature and affiliate professor of English. She's an established scholar of 18th century British literature who focuses on interdisciplinary and intermedial research in material and visual culture, architectural and landscape design history, textual materiality, book history, manuscript and print studies, and the history of subjectivity. She's written 2 books, The Self and It, published by Stanford University Press in 2010.
Great book. Sorry.
That's okay. And My Dark Room, which will be published in 2023 by the University of Chicago Press, and which I hope she'll tell us about. She's been invited to lecture and share her research at such institutions as the University of Sydney, the University of Edinburgh, Freie University Berlin, Columbia University, Wake Forest University, Harvard, and the Center for Book Arts. Past exhibitions she has curated include The Interactive Book and Portable Devices, which features notebooks as early information storage tools, both at the New York University Library's Special Collections Center. She served as editor of the prize-winning peer-reviewed journal, 18th Century Fiction, and is on the advisory board of the Papers of the Bibliographical Society of America. And I'm now going to hand things over to Malika to explain the Q&A to us.
Hello, everyone. So if you have questions during the talk for Julie, please make sure to put those in the Q&A box, which should be located at the bottom center of your screen. Please don't post those questions in the chat because they will be missed. So if you'd like to chat with other attendees, feel free to put that in the chat, but questions for Julie on her talk, please put those in the Q&A box.
All right, and without further ado, let's hand things over to Dr. Julie Park.
I'm trying to get my screen to share. Okay.
While Julie's getting that up, there we go.
Okay, no, here it is. Okay, does that look okay?
Looks great.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Susan. Thank you, Inger and Anne and Malika as well for your help organizing this talk. I'm really happy to be here. Okay, so the talk I'm giving today on the 18th century extra illustrated book is very much a part of a common space of the humanities that universities and libraries give us. It comes out of a larger project I've been working on in the interdisciplinary fields of textual materialism, visual culture, and archival and information studies. This project, called Writing's Maker, traces the history of writing as a practice of documenting and archiving the self in mixed media formats from the late 17th century to the early 19th. Studying commonplace books, extra illustrated books, pocket diaries, and penmanship manuals as media for creative methods of inscription, it argues that these interactive book genres served as paper-based systems for shaping and creating selfhood in the long 18th century. In doing so, they constitute an unrecognized material category of life writing. Bringing such intermediate writing practices to light from the 18th century offers a historical framework through which to read the novel self-inscription methods used in today's personal digital archiving systems and other 21st century forms of memory making and information storage. By understanding that writing encompasses techniques of making and generating meaning that fall outside of traditional methods, we may better understand the motivations that lead us to write in the first place through all ages in diverse media, analog and digital. Starting around 1770 and lasting until the early 20th century, it became a popular pastime in Britain and America for owners of books concerning historical biography, local history and travel, as well as works by Shakespeare, to illustrate their textual content further by adding and pasting into the books engravings from other sources. This practice is referred to as an act of extra illustrating a book. An alternative verb for the act of supplementing a book with printed illustrations obtained through other means is Grangerize, after the 18th century British author and clergyman James Granger, whose book, A Biographical History of England, first inspired the practice and made it popular. The engraved prints added to illustrate published books further were meant on a certain level to depict visually what or who was being described in words. Here is an example of a book that might have been extra illustrated by a reader of Jane Austen, Anne Radcliffe's A Sicilian Romance. Here you'll see miniature landscape prints possibly cut out from pocket almanacs into the blank spaces of the novel. These prints work to accentuate visually the Gothic atmosphere evoked by the novel's textual narratives. In this paper, I will discuss how the act of extra illustration not just illustrates textual narratives, but also demonstrates the book's hybrid identity as a storehouse or album for a personal print collection. In this way, extra illustration expands not just the size of the book, but also heightens its multi-dimensional identity as a textual object, material object, and visual object. This paper explores how extra illustrated books of 18th century Britain functioned as a multimedia mode of writing through integrating two forms of print, printed text and visual prints. It suggests that the manipulation and rearrangement of both forms of print produced a method of writing by hand that allowed the inscription of oneself into books written by others. In his work of revising printed textual matter with printed visual matter, extra illustration ultimately destabilizes what are often divided in scholarship, textual and visual cultures. Extra illustration demonstrates that different forms of printed matter, whether produced through the relief printing process as printed text is, or the intaglio printing process as engraved and etched images are, were deeply interdependent in producing a graphic form of textual materiality. For print historian Michael Twyman, printing is a means of giving form to and multiplying graphic signs and messages. Intaglio and relief printing are integral features in the production of early modern books, yet intaglio or engraved and etched illustrations are rarely part of the same printing process that produces text. Early printing manuals registered this division by being exclusively devoted either to printed words or printed images. Extra illustration presents an opportunity to see how the two were actively considered in relationship to each other by book and print owners of 18th century England. The revision of books through extra illustration produces different reading experiences. When reading an extra illustrated book, one is compelled to read the book from two perspectives, the authors and the book owners. At the same time, one can make very little sense of the added images on their own without reading the text with which they are meant to correspond, developing a new understanding of the subject matter in doing so. Not just the interpretive experience, but also the embodied experience of the original book is transformed too, for extra illustration adds volume to its body. Spectacularly and famously, Richard Bull's extra illustration of James Granger's biographical history of England expanded it from 4 quarto to 36 elephant-sized volumes. The 14,500 prints and drawings he had amassed in his collection were distributed throughout these volumes and pasted into the pages of the volumes. Another monumental example of extra illustration's bibliographic expansion is Alexander and Charlotte Sutherland's extra illustration of Edward Hyde, the first Earl of Clarendon's History of the Rebellion and Civil Wars in England. Their efforts stretched a book that originally comprised only 3 folio volumes to 61 elephant folio volumes. These volumes now fill custom-made glass-covered bookcases, lining the wall behind the print room attendant's desk at the Ashmolean Museum of Oxford University. Notably, while Charlotte Sutherland had donated her extra illustrated copies of Clarendon's history to the Bodleian Library in 1837, they were transferred eventually to the Ashmolean Museum. This move from a repository for books, a library, to one for visual artifacts, a museum, indicates the extra illustrated book's dual identity. It too is a repository for texts and images and approximates in this way both a library and a museum. The exorbitant number of added prints is what caused Clarendon's history to expand to so many giant volumes. It is also what pushes its identity from a book to an album of prints, with the papers gathered together within it, wavering between different categories of page as a print inside a book versus paper sheet as a print on its own. The removal of the original bindings for volumes of the Bull Granger at the Huntington Library bears out this observation. Rather than having its bindings replaced, the much requested book was disbounded and stored in archival boxes as a way to preserve individual pages better. With elephant-sized volumes approximately 23 inches long, it is extremely difficult to turn the pages without damaging them. Hence, the curatorial decision to remove the bindings was made to reduce the wear and tear to paper that reading the book invites. Yet, with this removal, the gestural act of turning the page, so central to reading, is lost. Indeed, without a binding, the paper on which the printed text and images are pasted ceases to be a page and turns back to a sheet. Without a binding, the book arguably ceases to be a book and is transformed into a collection of prints. The Huntington's catalog system further reveals the categorical fluidity inherent in extra illustrated books by cataloging the book as a library item and the prints within as museum items. In enlarging the size of the book, extra illustration also changes the way one moves through the text. Pages with engraved images are inserted where there were none before, expanding and slowing down time in doing so. Since proceeding through the text's original narrative demands tactile and visual encounters, with new images or new pages of heavier weight at times than the original ones. In addition, new interleavings are often oversized and folded into the book in order to fit inside of it, requiring the reader to change her rhythm of reading words and looking solely at images to focus on the process of unfolding. Yet, the disruption is one that can introduce wonder over the scale of the image, the significance of the subject its scale suggests, or simply the beauty and novelty of the print itself. For instance, the genealogical tree print of the royal progeny of the most famous kings of England, found inside the Sutherland's extra illustrated Clarendon, appears to bear the organic qualities it represents conceptually. The sheet-bearing portrait roundels of English rulers that are nestled in a network of tree branches and leaves grows when unfolded well beyond the length of the elephant volumes in which it is inserted onto the table in the Ashmolean print room. Similarly, the gorgeous mezzotint portrait of the Earl of Stafford, tipped into the Clark Library's extra illustrated copy of Evelyn's memoirs, impresses upon the reader the notion that its subject's social status exceeds the proportions of the volume that contains his image, introducing a visual nuance to Evelyn's diary entry about him. The members of the multigraph collective, authors of Interacting with Print, describe the process of encountering foldouts in extra illustrated books as one that requires the reader to touch and view the book as a material object, suspending whatever train of thought that was underway to focus on manual manipulation. The spatial and temporal relation to the bound book is immediately shifted with the presentation of an oversized sheet, indicating the subjectivity of the reading process and varying ways in which one might experience visual materials. The Multigraph Collective finds the shift in focus and mode of touch intrusive. They write, the processes involved, touching, looking, paying attention, thus work against absorption in the text, much less reverie or revelation. Whether they induce the wonder of discovery or irritation in the reader, it is fair to say that the foldouts, I claim, heighten through creating tactile and visual impressions, the awareness that extra illustration entails greater interactive engagement with textual objects. Interactivity continues to take place well after the act of making the extra illustrative volume. Furthermore, foldouts reinforce the sense that extra illustration augments the book's multidimensionality and challenge the notion that textual experience and documents are linear, flat, and based on reading words alone. Given all this, one might say that an extra illustrated work is as much the creation of the book owner as it is of the original author, mediated by the manual skill of a hired book trader who ultimately binds and secures the new folds and interleavings with leather, gilt, and stitching. The physical procedure of extra illustration has not been well documented, but the cut lines of prints, glue marks showing different methods of affixing engravings to backing sheets, and penciled in notes and numbers on the back of those sheets indicating where prints should go provide some clues. When extra illustration first emerged as a popular late 18th century activity, its production was undertaken in private households, as the labors of Catherine and Elizabeth Bull for their father, Richard Bull's volumes indicate. Later, craftspeople and bookbinder businesses were most usually hired to do the work. The domestic origins of early extra illustration efforts suggest the deeply personal and tactile level of connection extra illustrators and those close to them had with the materials of their creations, as well as the care taken to learn the skills for rearranging and preserving prints and text into new books of their own. The word that many scholars use for describing the interventions that extra illustrators make into published books is co-authorship. According to literature scholar and rare books curator Gabrielle, the basic impulse of the Grangerite is to gain intimacy as a reader with the author, subject, and body of the book, to the point of becoming a self-appointed co-author or publisher. What does co-authorship mean in relationship to the intermediate qualities of extra illustration? On what basis can one apply the role author, a term primarily used for textual works, to an act of creation that uses images as well as words? Is one still writing as well as authoring something when cutting and pasting visual objects onto a page, or having those acts done for you, as opposed to forming words on it with a tool? Those are the main questions that I'm thinking about when I think about extra illustration as a form of writing and not just reading. Granger's biographical history, the work that set off the late 18th century craze for extra illustration in Britain, supplies not so much definitive answers to those questions as an opportunity for understanding the background for them. Granger did not intend to have his book of 1769 be the start of what would become a popular pastime throughout the rest of the 18th century into the 19th century and early part of the 20th. He did not even intend to have people begin to paste and interleave engravings into books, let alone his book, as a form of interacting with the past. And yet, much of what he recommends and emphasizes in his preface develops a unique system of expression and knowledge organization that links the visual with the textual as a way to reinforce cultural memory. Furthermore, Granger's emphasis on visuality as situated in engravings as a means by which ideas and information might become materialized and thus more retainable by memory. His book was intended above all to be a guide both to help readers become knowledgeable buyers in an expanding print market, as well as more absorptive and insightful students of British history. The full title of Granger's book is A Biographical History of England, from Egbert the Great to the Revolution, consisting of characters disposed in different classes and adapted to a methodical catalog of engraved British heads. As this long title suggests, Granger created a taxonomy of historical portraiture based on the subjects and their biographies, rather than on the engravers. For a culture whose enthusiasm for novels promoted the genre's rise around the same period, the interest in historical subjects as historical characters is understandable. Highly structured and hierarchical, Granger's taxonomy was divided into 12 classes, ordered according to the social status and influence of the engraved subjects. By emphasizing the physical features of historical subjects and the different media used to represent them, Granger indicates his main interest lies both in antiquarianism and cultural heritage, not just history. In the first paragraph of his preface, he writes, "In every age and nation, distinguished for arts and learning, the inclination of transmitting the memory and even the features of illustrious persons to posterity has uniformly prevailed. The old Egyptians preserved a mummy for the same reason that the Greeks cut a statue or painted a portrait." Within this lineage, Granger places the 18th century English portrait engraving as an exemplary medium for remembrance. No invention has better answered the end of perpetuating the memory of illustrious men, he writes. Granger's approach to print engravings is one of substituting a portable conceptual world for a full-scale one. He writes, "In a collection of this kind, the contents of many galleries are reduced into the narrow compass of a few volumes, and the portraits of such as distinguish themselves for a long succession of ages may be turned over in a few hours." The other purpose of attending such an assemblage and methodical arrangement is to induce an effect on the memory, thus turning print engravings and their strategic organization into vital media for historical reenactment. Here, memory is rendered as a narrative experience, whereby we see the celebrated contemporaries of every age almost at one view, and by casting the eye upon those that sat at the helm of state and the instruments of great events, the mind is insensibly led to the history of that period, writes Granger. The methodical collection of engraved portraits forms a language, for it will serve, Granger proposes, as a visible representation of past events, become a kind of speaking chronicle, and those words are in italics, and carry that sort of intelligence into civil story. Through images and short and accurate descriptions, the print collection his book guides readers in compiling will provide, in a manner almost insensible, real and useful instructions. Furthermore, it will delight the eye, recreate the mind, impress the nation, fix the memory, and thereby yield no small assistance to the judgment. Using the word synchronism, Granger describes an additional benefit as one in which the personal history of the illustrious in every rank, along with their heads or portraits, when arranged according to their proper chronology in history as well as social status, they will be remembered in the several periods in which they really flourished. Here, Granger positions the visual image as an integral component in the creation of historical narrative, and the effort not just to summon it from a distance, but to reenact it within both the historical time frame and the spatial frame of pages in a book. Through synchronism, the act of turning over each page that displays the heads of historical figures connected to each other by the same moment in time becomes an occasion of reenacting that moment. Granger himself never envisioned that the engravings he helped readers select would be joined to his or any other book in print, as I mentioned earlier. But Richard Bull, a Master of Parliament for Newport and Cornwall, did. Bull, a novice print collector, was so earnest about following Granger's suggestions in his book, he used the recommended prints to illustrate Granger's text. As Lucy Peltz has revealed in her magisterial study of the extra illustrated book, Bull created his books in consultation with Granger himself, as well as his process of collection and arrangement. The individual pages of Bull's extra illustrated Granger are not so much placed into Granger's pages in themselves as they are new museum-like settings for them. Granger's catalog entries are clipped and placed beneath portraits, as you'll see to the left, with engraved ornamental links connecting them. The engraved links, a signature feature of Bull's extra illustration layouts, create not only a sense that word and image are being bound together or linked together, but also that the visual images are the full-bodied objects they represent. Printed images of coins are sometimes displayed next to the portraits, reinforces this sense of artifactual volume. Extra illustrated page becomes a pedagogical space or exhibition case, as it displays the relevant items for the subject that might supply information about it. Further transformations of Granger's text takes place in Bull's visually exuberant and architectural title page, lettered and drawn with Gothic ornamentation by his daughters. Bull called his work series of engraved heads from Egbert the Great to the Revolution, rather than Granger's original biographical history of England from Egbert the Great to the Revolution. Furthermore, rather than an authorial byline, that attributes the work to Granger, the byline to Bull's title page claims, using language that evokes archival processing, the whole collected and arranged in chronological order by R.B. or Richard Bull. The very rearrangement of his original title conveys not so much an act of co-authorship, but an act of appropriation that mediates the contents of Granger's text through the perspective of a wholly different creator. The ultimate turn in the visual rhetoric of authorship is the prominent placement of the Bull family coat of arms at the bottom of the page. As a collector and extra illustrator, even one who deferentially availed himself of Granger's expertise, Bull was asserting his authority, creativity, and interpretation of printed materials. For Sherry MacDonald, collector all, as a self-aware process of creating a set of objects conceived to be meaningful as a group, is also a means of fashioning and performing the self via material things. By placing and unfolding the contents of his print collection in relation to a textual narrative he processed and ordered through his own perspective, Bull was practicing a form of literacy espoused by Granger himself that integrates image with text. William Loring Andrews, prominent American book collector at the turn of the 20th century, approximated the intermedial literacy system specific to extra illustration when describing its practitioner as one who burned the midnight oil, poring over old prints and reading them into his books. Thomas Frognall Dibdin, famed turn of the 19th century English bibliographer and robust explicator of bibliomania, let me say that again, Bibliomania, the title of one of his books, called attention to the craftsman aspect of the system, as well as the interchangeability of word with image as units of illustration, when he referred to one of its methods as bringing together from different works by means of the scissors or otherwise by transcription, every page or paragraph which has any connection with the character or subject under discussion. Dibdin elaborates, this is a useful and entertaining mode of illustrating a favorite author and copies of works of this nature when executed by skillful hands. Also suggesting that the project of extra illustration is an architectural one, Dibdin refers to the acquisition of certain choice prints as forming the foundation materials of a Grangerian building. Dibdin's architectural metaphor applies to one of the formal and technical features of extra illustrated books, the individually made paper windows through which the prints are often displayed. Even without these windows, created through a process called inlaying, the margins of the book surrounding a pasted-in print often appears to be its frame, as if it were a window. Earlier techniques of extra illustration entailed simply pasting the print onto the backing sheet, creating unnecessary bulk and buckling in doing so. Inlaying was developed to prevent this. Though the documentation of early extra illustration text has been sparse, there are later sources that explain or demonstrate the inlaying technique. After selecting sheets of paper that match the color and size of the text block in a chosen book, is to cut the print down to the desired size in relation to the leaf. The outer edges of the print are shaved off at a bevel with a special blade. Openings are made into the plain paper leaf 1/4 of an inch wider than the shape and size of the print, using the same beveling technique at the edges. The beveled edges of the print and paper window are fastened together with paste. This technique of making two surfaces connect at an angle is known in woodworking and architecture as chamfering. That's spelled Chamfering. It is fitting that such structural intricacy is an element of book forms that late 19th century bibliographer Daniel Treadwell called illuminated palaces. And that's actually the title of a celebrated exhibition at the Huntington on the extra illustrated book. And this video was created for that exhibition. The chamfered window making technique can be seen in the Sutherland Clarendon, a monumental production of extra illustration that rivals the Bull Granger in importance. Archivists refer to the act of moving physical records to new folders and boxes as rehousing. In the case of the Sutherland Clarendon, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, an act of rehousing took place that moved a book of 4 folio size volumes to 1:61 folio size volumes. In doing so, one might say a new ownership of cultural property and heritage was established. As objects belonging to heritage institutions, the volumes have been further rehoused into their glass-covered bookcases made specifically for them in the Ashmolean print room. While the resizing measures alone signal the vigor with which Clarendon's book was transformed by its extra illustration, the windows that were created for the numerous added prints, displaced textual extracts, indicate most definitively its new authorship and its revision. The custom-made window sheet for the title page of the Sutherland Clarendon suggests not just the objects falling within its boundaries are defined by the extra illustrator, but also that they are subjected to his or her perspective. The window frame, in other words, establishes that a single subjective point of view determines how the title page is seen and the extent to which it can be seen, in a way that the title page does not. At the same time that they produce a sense that the leaves of an extra illustrated book are being filtered through a particular viewpoint, the blank pages with openings cut into them turn pages into windows that are, one might say, akin to today's computer screens. The multiple images of the same historical personage or the same building that often fill up the interleavings of extra illustrated books follow Granger's principle that the more variety of the same person, the more the true likeness may with more certainty be determined. Excuse me. The visual repetition of the same heads and buildings stored inside the extra illustrated book not only stages a historical reenactment on paper, as revealed earlier, but also turned the book into something like a database. Excuse me, I'm going to have to pause. As such, it is a paper environment where, like the commonplace book, pieces of knowledge are stored for later use, though, as has been pointed out, at times through acts of mutilating other books and prints. But with these tactile interventions, the drama of historical synchrony is staged and experienced, and views to cultural memory are both preserved and passed down with each act of cutting and pasting and of folding and unfolding the page. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fun.
Yes, thank you. What wonderful images.